whatever this is, we have a situation where like the ghost people don't want to talk to the UFO people. The UFO people don't want to talk to the cryptid people at all. What do we do about the OBE people or anybody that reports anything to do with precognition? And the thing is that if we actually talk to experiencers and we don't edit them, we just let them talk about what happened to them, you'll find something that's thornier, stranger, more absurd, harder to wrap your head around. But if we don't have that wider range of data, how are we going to actually have an answer?
Chris Lehto. Welcome to Lehto Files. Today on Lehto Files, we're joined by J. Christopher King. He's the co-founder and director of the Experiencer Group. It's an online community for people who've had encounters with UAPs and other anomalous phenomena. He's also the co-creator of the Inquire Anomalous conference series in New York City that brings experts together to discuss the unexplained. He has a very new and hit docuseries called Cosmosis that we'll look into. And through his work, Jay helps bridge the gap between experiencers, scientists, and the public push for UAP transparency. Jay, it's great to have you on Lehto Files. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. It's great to be here today.
Okay, excellent. We were chatting before I actually hit record, and it turns out you live in New Jersey, of all places, and you have a quite compelling video. Can you go through quickly just your actual video that you captured of the drones in New Jersey?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know what to even term this anymore. There's such a debacle with, are we seeing drones? Are we seeing UAP? Are we seeing, some red teaming situation of maybe a new defense contractor project? Are we seeing orbs? And I've seen some of these wild, giant, kind of car-sized, seemingly drones that are unconventional for this area anyway. And I understand, and I saw that relatively early, starting around the night, actually, the weekend of Thanksgiving last year, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, a high traffic day on highways. People coming back from wherever they grew up, wherever they escaped, when they started their career in the New Jersey, New York area, coming back, and I was with my partner. We were in the car driving back from Ohio, and we're near Picatinny Arsenal. And we're just driving along one of the major highways. We're stuck in traffic because, again, one of the busiest traffic days of the year. And I look up and I say, "What's that?" And she says, "I don't know what that is." And it seems huge and it seems low. And it certainly looks like a drone, and there's FAA looking lights on it. And at the same time, it seemed much bigger and much more elaborate than most commercial drones that we were used to seeing in the area. It moved off the highway off to the right and kind of over a marsh area. Um, and she looked over and she said, "Oh, there's another one. Oh, that's strange." And then the next day, I get a text from her, and it's one of the first news reports from New Jersey local news saying, people are seeing these strange drones in the sky. Um, and that was kind of before it really took hold in online social media brouhaha, generally speaking. And yeah, anyway, about January 17th, in fact, it was January 17th, early in the evening, I was just walking around again with my partner in the town that I live in Essex County. And it's a pretty pedestrian town, and we are just walking to dinner. And then I saw two either low or very large, kind of classic amber orange orbs, or what appeared to be classic orange amber orbs, because I don't know what this is, and I don't know that anybody else does either. Does that make sense? So I've
Excellent.
got this from two different camera positions. I've got it from my camera phone, and I've got it from her camera phone. And I guess I'll start with the one, and we can kind of get into it a little bit if you
Yeah,
like.
let's see it.
Sound good? Okay,
Definitely.
cool.
Okay, there's no sound here, so I will just talk through, at least no sound to the end. But basically, you're in a city, and we see these two orange glowing balls, looks like. I mean, they're kind of flashing a little bit, so I could see how one argument could be Chinese lanterns. We'll see. We'll see if that is a possibility. But I'd say they're, I don't know, a few hundred feet apart, probably maybe 1 to 2,000 feet up, and just floating. Yeah, they seem about, I don't know, a meter across. We'll see. I don't see any obvious signs of wind in the video. When we zoom out, you can see the trees. They're not blowing or anything. So that'll be my first thought is what was the wind that night? But yeah, those are orange orbs.
Oh shit, you're right. I don't know. It did. Oh. What? What? It's
Okay,
gone.
that was interesting. Yeah, so basically two orange orbs looking about like flying in formation. And you have another
Yeah,
video as well.
that's right. Yeah, would you like to see that one as well,
Yeah,
just
we
for
can
kind of
just play that one
the
and
overall
we
effect?
can talk while it's playing because there wasn't
Sure.
much audio there. But
Yeah.
my
So
first thought is it kind of looks like the profile of satellites, but it's much bigger than a satellite, and the color
mhm.
is weird. You know, because you'll see the orange if it's down low along the horizon. You know, if you look at a star or you look like the
Mhm.
planet Venus, it's white, right? Because anything that hits the sunlight up in space should be white because sunlight is white. It has all the colors of the rainbow. But as it gets lower,
Mhm.
like right above the horizon, you know, the sun will turn orange when it sets because it's going through the atmosphere. So you'll see like Venus will turn orange. And that's what it looks like, the color orange of Venus there when it's low. But these things aren't low. You know, you're looking about, I don't know, 35 degrees up at an angle as
Mhm.
they're passing overhead.
Yep. Yep. So here's the other one.
Okay, so we'll play
And
the second
again,
video now. Yep.
yeah, and again, this is just from two separate iPhones
You're
that
near
are,
each
I
other,
guess,
right? It's just,
yeah, we're
okay.
maybe 6 to 12 feet apart, dependent, kind of walking back and forth a little bit on the
Okay.
sidewalk. So here's the second one. I think the first video is more impressive, but this one is, good for reference as well.
Yeah. You can see it's interesting the color. It's that orange.
Yeah, and just how locked in they are together. Like you were saying, in term similar to sometimes programmed satellites these days, but I haven't seen many other craft that are capable of. I've scrubbed back and forth with my thumb, and they're just so dang locked in together.
And there's no
They
flashing
seem to be
lights.
almost,
They have to have
yeah,
flashing lights if they're flying as airplanes. Drones should have flashing lights. They're just this like steady amber
yeah.
light.
And of course, when you try to say video the moon at night or something like that, it's always less impressive through the lens of the iPhone or Android or what have you than when you're looking at it with the naked eye. And that was certainly the case in this situation as well. If they were satellites, they either had to be incredibly low to the ground or they had to be incredibly big or both. Um, and again, like the color, the signature of the color, it was so close to what people often describe as a classic orb scenario. And I saw nothing other than just that kind of self-illuminated glow. There was no kind of architecture to it that I could see. It just seemed like a field of that color.
Can you play the
And
first one again? That video was really good. Can you mind playing that one more time? We
sure,
can
yeah,
chat.
no, not at all. Yeah,
And
here
did it
here
look like that color in person through your eyes? It couldn't have been maybe through the camera. It recorded at a different color.
Oh, it definitely looked like that color. And as you can see, it looks like that color from both camera positions there. So let's see here now.
And what's the main
Okay.
debunking argument? I'm guessing Chinese lantern. Is that you said that it could
Yeah.
be?
Yeah, we got Mick West himself on that thread
You
saying
did.
it looks like
Excellent.
Chinese land. Yeah, yeah. So almost honored to have the master debunker himself. Because like here in Essex County, we're just swimming in Chinese lanterns,
Yeah.
especially ones that are able to be somehow completely locked in with each other over the course of hundreds of yards. Anyway, what are you
So
gonna
that
do?
was his main argument then. Is looks like Chinese lanterns.
It didn't seem to be too much of it didn't seem like a very thorough argument, to be
Yeah.
fair. Yeah,
Because yeah, one goes as we'll see it too if you play it again, the one goes out before the other one.
that's right.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
this camera,
and
yeah, it looks really full orange.
yes. So this was a iPhone Plus or Pro, or it was the most current
Nice.
Plus version.
It's much better. Yeah, I should upgrade my
Yeah,
phone, I guess.
that's right. Yeah.
I guess.
Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah, I can see it. It is kind of flashing. Could it be two Chinese lanterns flying in formation?
Maybe if they were tethered together and like I mean, again, if you scrub back and forth, they are so locked in together.
Yeah,
And you would know better than I. Like, I'm not again and again, like I'm not claiming this to be aliens. I'm not claiming this to be orbs. I just know that it looked a lot like what people report.
yep,
As director of the experiencer group, I'm used to hearing orb reports, and I've seen orbs kind of near Virginia Beach and other locations before that look like this. I don't pretend to know where they
Oh
come
shit,
from.
you're
I
right.
don't pretend to know what they are, and I don't,
Dang.
and I'm not entirely certain that this is that. You know, if somebody debunked it thoroughly with some
What?
information, that'd be okay to me. But I certainly found it curious, and very atypical for this area. Um, so
well, they have
there
to
you have
fly
it.
with the wind. So really the wind is like your main argument for Chinese lanterns, is if you have like a solid wind report from a local airport.
Mm-hmm.
Because those things were moving along at a pretty good clip. You're looking at like at least 20 knots of wind up at several thousand feet. So you'd have to have actual wind direction going that way. If the wind was going the
Yeah.
opposite direction, it makes it a stronger argument that it's not Chinese lanterns.
And on the ground, there was almost no wind whatsoever. You could even see in the trees, but a couple thousand feet up, I have no idea. You know,
And what about the
uh,
first sighting you mentioned? So that you said there was flashing lights, is what it sounded like.
that's right. So that Sunday, the first kind of drone sighting in this flap of New Jersey drones and whatever else is going on was the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and I was driving up one of the major highways here in New Jersey. I was driving through Morris County at that time, and I was very near um, the Picatinny Arsenal area,
Yeah, interesting.
and and um, and right over the highway, like directly over the highway, and maybe a similar kind of angle, but what looked to be several hundred yards forward of my position, uh, I saw this drone that was relatively elaborate and looked like it had almost like an exoskeleton around it. Like some of the lights seemed to be um, illuminating metallic kind of rod shapes around the craft, for lack of a better term,
Hmm.
that seemed to show some kind of armature or exoskeleton or kind of rigging even on the craft itself. And it had um, what looked to be FAA oriented kinds of lights, what you see with regular drone craft, like kind of a red and a green light, but then other white lights. And it seemed much larger and more elaborate than than most commercial drones that we see in this area. Of course, I live about 13 to 15, about 14 miles away from New York City. I'm in a suburb of New York City, and there's a lot of flight traffic around here. There are a lot of airports around here, and there are a lot of drones around here.
Hmm.
Um, but what we were seeing that night and what people reporting and what we've seen since then, especially in the month of December, um, were unlike other commercial drones that we've seen around here. And of course, we've seen a lot of people throwing cold water on this scenario as if they have some kind of mastery over, you know, the intellectual capabilities of those in the exurbs of New York City, as if they have any kind of, authority, military or otherwise, over this area. And then, a lot of conflicting reports, both from the federal government themselves and, local mayors that seem very frustrated with the situation. There's a lot going on, but
Is it still going on? Is there still frustration? Are people still seeing drones in the sky?
people are still seeing these things. There was a high point where it seemed like there was almost some kind of mapping exercise happening. So later into December, before leaving for the holidays, um, on a different night, walking in that same neighborhood, going out of the house and noticing that there were at least about five, initially three, and then pointing out about five of those similar drones, like large, seemingly car or SUV sized drones, flying relatively low. Um, and again, there's a discrepancy there because it's like, how big is it versus how high is it? And
Yep.
you would be in a much better position to understand these things than I am. But from what I saw, if it was at a conventional drone height, it would seem to be between the size of a car and an SUV. And there would be multiple of these drones flying in these kind of like back and forth configurations simultaneously,
Hmm.
right? That it almost looked like, landscapers in a yard, or like lawnmowers, just kind of like methodically paving over an area in the sky and then coming back again, almost as if it was some kind of mapping exercise. And, that's total speculation on my part. I have no idea what they were doing up there. No clue whatsoever. However, I was walking around, and there are other people. It's a pedestrian town. There are a lot of other people on the sidewalks, and it felt like a J.J. Abrams or a Spielberg movie. People just kind of like on the sidewalk with their mouth open, like staring at the sky. And then, I went over to a local shop, and the owner of the shop was in like the back parking lot, and he was just like, "There's seven up there right now, man. Like, look at that." And I was like, "Yeah, man, it's crazy."
Seven.
And he's like, I was like, "I've never seen anything like this before, man. I've never seen anything like this before." And then the next night, it was the same situation. It started around like 6:45 p.m. or so, from what I could figure, and it went on until 11-ish, maybe.
Wow.
And it happened over 2 nights here. I'm in Essex County again. And then there were still lingering reports after that, but it seemed like there was that high point of 2 nights where there was just seemingly dozens of these over the whole entire town. Um, and yeah, I don't know what to say about it. You know, there are
But
a
since
lot of
then, you
theories.
haven't had any nights like that since then, since December.
Not not that I've noticed. Just again, with the video that I showed you was different. I mean,
Hmm.
they appeared more as kind of classic amber orbs in appearance, and the others more look like flying ambulances, in the sky,
Yeah.
essentially, giant drones. And and that I'm pointing at my other screen. That video, those two videos were from January 17th. And I've seen other large drones since then, and I've heard from others them seeing that too, but it seems to more be sparse now, and it seems like more of the activity is again kind of towards some of the military installations around here. There's Picatinny Arsenal, and that seemed to be one of the early kind of center points. And there's apparently a Lockheed program, Aegis, this kind of domain awareness program, seems to be based around there as well. And there seems to be a preponderance. There seems to be an abnormal amount of these drones around that general area. So, one theory could be, just throwing it out there, that in December and then afterwards, that this could have been a confidential red teaming exercise. The Ukraine Russia war, there's been a lot of reports, like in the New York Times, about how much commercial drones have been a huge game changer on the field in situations like that, suicide drones and whatnot. And it would make sense to me that if Picatinny Arsenal is a staging ground for that or other wars, as has long been rumored, and or that Lockheed's domain awareness program, Aegis, is around that general area as well, that perhaps it would have been an opportune moment to pull off some red teaming exercises to understand better what vulnerabilities could be with both of those. But that's just speculation. I don't have any insider awareness of anything. That's one of the best hypotheses that I've heard for the drones. It doesn't explain everything. It certainly doesn't explain to me that random video, those two videos that I just showed you. But it's curious. What do you think about that? What do you think about the whole scenario? Is it okay for me to ask that question?
Of course. Yeah, no, I think we're kind of led to believe that everyone there just never looked up before
Right.
December.
Before.
That's kind of the idea. So you were born the same year, 78. So, you've been around for almost half a century. Have you ever looked up before? Like,
Absolutely.
okay, so
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So did you look at the sky? I guess if you've been into UAPs, you tend to look up more. I look at the stars all the time. I'm
Abs-
always looking up.
all the time. And not only that, but here again, we're in a suburban area of New York City. A lot of the people that live here either grew up right here and have been traveling in for work, or eventually moved out of New York and are ex-urban people that used to live in the city and then wanted to have a yard, right? And so it's a whole area that's filled with either lifelong pedestrians or people that became pedestrians in adulthood, that they spend an inordinate amount of their time walking around, looking around. And
Yeah.
I, I think that you live in Portugal. I don't know where exactly in Portugal you live, but knowing a bit about European culture in general, if you're driving around versus when you're walking around, um, I find when I'm walking around, I look up at the sky more often. I'm able to do that. Like, I don't have to be as aware of my surroundings as I am when I'm in a car. And in a situation like that, and when you're in a town that's completely filled with a bunch of pedestrians, it becomes notable when you see something different going on.
So you definitely noted it was different starting end of November.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Because that's not the the impression we get, and you hear from the news report, and you see basically Caroline Levitt saying that there's nothing to see here, as research drones, etc., is that it's just airplanes, and that everyone in New Jersey in that area just didn't really look up before, and now they're looking up and like, oh, there's planes there.
yeah, but it's ridiculous because all we have to do is like use our memory to remember back in December that all these mayors, all these
Yep.
individual citizens and folks, and local authorities and even some federal authorities were saying, like, we don't have an understanding with what's going on here.
Yeah.
this is frustrating. We're not getting any clear answers from anyone. And then a month later, the same
Yeah.
media outlets and overlapping media outlets, or even more legacy media outlets, are saying like, oh, that was nothing.
Yep.
uh you know these you
Nothing.
know these people that live in a very expensive area, right outside New York City, they're a bunch of country bumpkins. Actually, they've never looked at the sky before.
Yeah.
And it's not just insulting, it's a little bit insulting, it's a little bit offensive, and it's also like, you don't have to be a Jersey resident or a New York City area resident to find it insulting. I think
Yeah.
that anybody that has better than a goldfish memory should feel insulted by that, because of
Yeah.
the stories that they heard and the reversals about it. They're absurd to me
Yeah.
anyway.
50 drones coming over, coming off the ocean. Is that that's
Yes.
for research? Really? You had 50 drones with no further explanation. They don't explain anything. And at the time,
Yeah.
no one knew where the 50 drones, came from. And then we still haven't heard where did the 50 drones come from. It's just kind of
Yeah.
insane. And now it's just like, oh, forget about it. Don't worry about it. Then you
Right.
start thinking like, maybe I was just making it up. Maybe I made up all these drones and they're just the people had never looked up before.
Yeah, and maybe I made up like all those web archived sites showing news reports of people being confused as hell, 2 months ago. I don't know that that's, I don't that's not the case, I don't think. And if it was just for research, like, at least explain to us like adults in
Yeah.
whatever sanitized way you can, why the hell
What's the research?
they were wasting so much energy to over the ocean. If it was for research and it was ostensibly, carving out these paths over municipalities, etc., like, why were they spending so much battery power and energy to fly over so much water at the outset? Couldn't they have deployed them more locally? Wouldn't have that been, more efficient? I mean, I don't know, but like, at least give us an explanation that makes sense, or treat us like adults,
Yeah.
Um, anyway.
No, there's nothing. No, I hope we'll talk about how we can maintain the pressure and push for UAP disclosure later. But I wanted to touch
sure.
on your Cosmosis, your docuseries. It looks great. So why don't we check out the trailer right now? So let's roll the trailer.
Sounds great.
What I saw that night, I can never forget it.
There was a connected feeling as if it could read my mind. So I waved up at it.
I just remember after that experience, I felt like my life was supposed to be lived a certain way, that effectively I was given a second chance.
People don't just experience it in flight. There are other experiences that they're not even reporting.
There is an extraordinary conversation going on about UFOs and technology and weapons, but not the experience, not the actual experience of being face to face with this.
I think when somebody sees a UFO or has an experience of one, it kind of forces you to confront what your belief systems are, how you feel about things, how you feel about other people, your place in the world, and how big or small it is.
A lot of the stigma that surrounds this subject has to do with the manufactured campaign, an institutionalized campaign to keep people from talking about it, especially scientists.
If you're confused and you're lost, it's because the people who do this are great at their jobs. They've been perfecting this for decades. They're not craftsmen of disinformation, they're artists.
The fact that we're not alone in the universe, it's paradigm shifting. It's huge. It could be the biggest story in human history. So why aren't more people talking about this?
We don't need to wait around for the government to give us the answers. The UFO phenomenon is a part of our reality. It's not something that the government can lock up in an underground bunker somewhere and keep from us. It's everywhere, and it's happening all the time.
If you look at the history of humans, you're going to see that it's a history of engagement with non-human intelligence, because a lot of people believe in non-human intelligence.
I think it's very difficult to talk about the strange stuff, precisely because it's so strange. We're living in a little corner of the world, just a little corner of it that we call reality. We need to turn off the lights, open the door, and walk out of this little house we live in, and then we're going to start to see something real.
Okay, so how long have you been working on this project, Jay?
Oh, okay. So our first shoot for Cosmosis, UFOs and the New Reality season 1 was actually at the first Soul conference, the first Soul symposium. So that was back in November 2023. We started working towards that season, me and Kelly Chase of the UFO Rabbit Hole, and Jordan Flowers, who is now also associated with UAPDF. We started working on this series back in the summer of 2023, just kind of the germinating seeds of what that could be. I have a TV background. Way back in my past, I went to school for film originally. I've got I went for video and video art and fine art at School of Visual Arts for my bachelor's, and got a film degree for my master's at Bard, and then started working in nonfiction television and travel shows and other types of programs, mainly for Discovery Channel and related networks associated with Discovery, back in my late 20s and through my early 30s, and largely through my 30s. And so I took about 6-7 years off of doing anything TV related. And then, Kelly's such a great writer. She does such a wonderful job, and she'd never written for television before. And Jordan was really interested in exploring the possibilities of being able to do independent media in a bigger way. And so things coalesced, and we drew up a slide deck and found regular small investors, conventional investors investing a relatively small amount of money in the conventional way, drew up a conventional business plan with a conventional return. Jordan went to Columbia Business School. He's got a great head for business, and is really interested in kind of professionalizing the UAP space and trying to get more people in a place where conventional business practices can be enacted, where more people can make a regular salary from being involved in this field. There's been a lot of stigma. I mean, just as a brief aside,
you don't say.
Yeah, right. There's so much social stigma online, social media stigma, about the idea that, on the one hand, people say this is the most important thing to happen to humankind, or this could be the biggest story in human history. And at the same time, nobody can make a regular living wage off of it. This is the most important thing that could to the story of humankind. Nobody can make money off of it.
But we're all
Nobody can make a
grifters, man.
salary.
We're making millions of dollars grifting up these all these dollars just flying everywhere.
It's absurd. It's absurd. I mean, it's partially absurd because, I mean, again, an aside, the idea online, people say oh, they wrote a book. They wrote a book.
Making millions.
They just want money off, making millions off that book.
Yeah.
You know how many book sales there are in UFOs? Talk to Richard Dolan. Richard Dolan lives in Syracuse in a house that he's lived in for over 25 years. You know what I mean? I know that for a fact. And he likes his house. He likes that area.
He's made dozens of dollars. Yeah. I mean,
dozens.
So hard to make money
exactly.
on books.
He lives in
anything.
Yeah, but and it's absurd. Most people that I just got Forbidden Science 6. Jacques Vallée's new journals, right? Great book. I really, really encourage anybody interested in ufology history to have this. I don't think this is one of our biggest heroes in the whole field. I would be surprised if this ever sells more than 10,000 copies. You know what I mean? I'd be extraordinarily surprised. And it's an Amazon on demand book. So like the guy can't be making more than $5
If
per
that,
copy.
yeah, per copy.
You
I
know what I
doubt.
mean? Yeah.
Yes.
And and he's in his 80s. So, if he's incredibly lucky over the course of the remaining time in his life, knock on wood, maybe he makes, half of 1 year's salary off of that.
Yeah.
Come on. Like
It
it's
takes a long
ridiculous.
time to write a book too. It's not like you're just writing it, pumping them out one every month or
Exa-
something.
exactly. I think a
Years.
lot of that chatter is partially through social engineering and perception management, where it's like if you did anything, if you were in anywhere near kind of like the spirituality space, which is just adjacent to ufology, to the chagrin of many people in ufology, there's no harm in charging for acupuncture or a back massage, right? Or, like a consultation or life coaching or anything like this. But if you are involved in UFO research, which is, by the way, directly adjacent to a lot of security programs around the national security state, right?
Yep.
And transparency issues and deeply classified projects that have billions of dollars around them, then you're not allowed to make any money off of it, right?
Yeah.
And
Surprise.
just think to it's wild to me that so much of this culture has been rerouted in the last 2 decades away from genuine questions around the national security state, and we've been made to think that these people are giving us the absolute truth and that they're not vilifying people in our community that are asking serious questions. And that debate seems to be more along the lines of like having that kind of conversation seems to be more aligned with free speech to me and what it means to live in a true democracy, right?
Yep.
And I think our forefathers, the Leonard Stringfields, the Donald Kehoes, the Coral Lorenzens of the world would be rolling in their grave if they knew how much we've capitulated to like taking our answers from people from the intelligence community. Anyway, so
Yep.
along those lines, Cosmosis, UFOs in a New Reality is on Apple TV and Amazon Prime and other outlets. And we really explore experiencer cases and looking at kind of the history of ufology and where we are right now, but really trying to look more at frameworks for understanding ufology in a greater way, in a bigger picture that lets us kind of know that there ufology really touches on, and UAP cases touch on a lot. And it touches on a lot with the range of anomalous experience if you actually talk to experiencers themselves, because of the range of modalities in part that actually occur. If you're only interested in looking at nuts and bolts cases, that's absolutely fine. But if you talk to any experiencer that has a significant impact from their experiences, there's usually a range of modalities. Sometimes that can be precognition, it can involve poltergeist activity or seemingly poltergeist activity. There can be a range of modalities there. And it seems that there have been these kind of silos, these ghettos of areas where it's like, you can only be a ghost person, and you wear black clothes and you get an EVP recorder and you get a flashlight and you go into a house at night, or you go into a hospital at night, and that's what you do. Or if you're in ufology, you have to kind of like salute the flag and like think about, the state of of things with regard to geopolitical issues, and that has like a huge
National
amount to do with
security.
whether
Yep.
national security and whether this stuff can ever get out there. And golly gee willikers, we hope it can, but it might take 30 years. And and then whatever this is, we have a situation where like the ghost people don't want to talk to the UFO people, the UFO people don't want to talk to the cryptid people at all. what do we do about the OBE people or anybody that reports anything to do with precognition? And the thing is that if we actually talk to experiencers and we don't edit them, we just let them talk about what happened to them. Even some of the most profound cases that we have in our historical record, Kenneth Arnold, right? Mario Woods, who we had in our show Cosmosis, many other folks. When you actually talk to them about their cases, you'll find something that's thornier, stranger, more absurd, harder to wrap your head around. But if we don't have that wider range of data, how are we going to actually have an answer? Are we just going to have some kind of like fetishized window into the phenomena, or are we going to actually get some answers without that?
I've been amazed too that if you look, you mentioned the spiritual community or like the near death experiencers, their accounts on YouTube, right? Because I'm on YouTube, I watch YouTube and look at the other communities. They're way bigger. You have massive audiences for near death experiencers. So there's like this whole group, which almost seems larger than the UFO community, of the near death experiencers or the out of body experiencers, the spiritualists, and they're even further to the woo account, but they're bigger than ufology, and it seems like they've gone just way into the woo. They're so far into the woo that no one even really notices them, but this group is huge. I mean, the like Next Level Soul, they have 1 million subscribers, put out tons of videos, much more views than like all of the main like weaponized. They're going to get way more views than probably most of your UFO shows, even the big time UFO channels, Jesse Michaels, Weaponized, etc. But they're not really mentioned in UFO circles. But they're like the aliens are already here. Like they already know what's going on, and it's even bigger than the UFO community.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And I think that part of it has to do with these, these fetishes or the kind of aesthetics that we put around things sometimes. And if we can kind of unshackle ourselves from some of those aesthetic issues to kind of promote more dialogue between these groups, I think that we might find more information. Because on the one hand, when you say, I don't want to mischaracterize you, but when you're talking about an NDE group and they're going so far to this direction I hear sometimes people saying like, well, I just know it because I saw it in a dream. Like I'm absolutely sure of it or something like that. I understand people's like personal convictions or their, how they come to their own thoughts, their own, they trust themselves or they trust whatever, kind of guides they have. I get that and I have respect for that, but I also understand that there's a different level of data and a different level of proof and, a necessity of that to somebody maybe like yourself or people, that have a more kind of traditional technological, scientific, or military background with regard to data and what they've seen. Totally understand that. But if we don't kind of talk to everyone and we don't promote dialogue within all of these communities that address what we term as anomalous experiences, but it's like, what's an anomalous experience, right? Because if some of these things, like people see ghosts in all world cultures, seemingly all world cultures everywhere around the world, going back, centuries, right? Going back thousands and thousands of years. So, is that really anomalous anymore? Or is it just something that we've been conditioned not to talk about?
Yeah.
And
or what about prayer, religion? I mean, you're basically when you pray, aren't you communicating with a non-human intelligence? It's right there. I mean, through telepathic means. And yet, when we talk about telepathy or communicating with other forms of non-human intelligence with our minds, people say no, it's impossible. It can't happen. Meanwhile, they'll go every Sunday and go and pray in a church, and literally they believe they're talking to a non-human intelligence through telepathic means.
Absolutely. And, a lot of people that have religious and spiritual inclinations that don't go to church and pray, they'll stay home and they'll sit down on a cushion and meditate. And there's similar processes that happen there as well. And so, between those two operations of prayer and meditation, that's actually a majority of the world. The majority of the population of our planet it views themselves as anyway as religious and or spiritual. And yet at the same time there's this idea that yeah, we can't contact people that way, but we clearly can. I mean, one of the things that I found most interesting is that if you unshackle these kinds of cultural expectations or the aesthetics of any particular wing of paranormal discourse, that if you say like, have you ever had anything happen to you, anything at all, people say like, nah, not really. Not you, anybody in your family, nah, not really. And then they'll sit there and they'll be, well, there was this one time and I had a dream, or like my grandma had a dream or what have you, and it came true. She called me and she said that like I shouldn't, like don't cross the street, like somebody's going to try to cut you off or whatever. And it happened exactly like she said it. And I found that there are many more cases like that if you just let somebody kind of go and don't try to define what that experience is going to be. And then after you do that, you might find that that person becomes more open-minded to the phenomena itself. And so that's kind of partially what I try to I want to kind of push out there through work like the Experiencer Group, also through directing like the docuseries Cosmosis, UFOs, and a New Reality, are ways that we can promote dialogue and really destigmatize things on a much grander level. Because again, if we have that data and we understand that maybe our perception is different than we thought, maybe consciousness is a tough word and it challenges everybody, but we don't get more answers about what consciousness is by not talking about it, right? So if we can address these issues about extrasensory perception, is it extrasensory perception or is it extended sense perception, as people like Kay Randall May, who by the way, like, has worked closely with people like Kit Green and others that are very, very tied with the intelligence community. These are people that have been long looked to as experts. And what we look and see within even our conventional understanding of ufology is that some of the people that we've most been trained to look towards as the heroes and the pillars of this community actually have, human potential as one of the key considerations for what they're interested in. It's not just craft in the sky, it's what humans themselves are capable of perceiving.
So you have tons of experience with experiencers. You have your conferences that you've set up, and now you've done your first series of Cosmosis, right? The series one, you're filming season two. So, what was the biggest thing you learned after doing season one of Cosmosis? What's kind of the biggest change going in from when you came out of that series?
You know, I think that there are a couple answers to that question. And one would be about the profound family connections and what seem to be either family and genetic lineages of experiencers and how prevalent that is and wondering why that is. But that was something that I'd already been tipped off to through my work in the Experiencer Group.
So through family, did it go through specifically only bloodlines or?
Yeah, there have been situations, I mean, a lot of bloodlines, yes. And there is kind of a nature versus nurture situation of this as well, where I've seen this myself as an experiencer myself, but also I've heard dozens, hundreds of reports from other experiencers through the Experiencer Group and elsewhere, where somebody will marry into a family and then they've never had experiences before, but through proximity to people that are regular experiencers, they start to somehow become more either attuned to the phenomena if it's kind of an extended sense of perception, or they just become privy to it through proximity. And so there, it doesn't seem to just be a blood situation, but it definitely seems to exist within realms of families, right? And it becomes often this kind of guarded family secret amongst certain families, where even in certain situations, say there's three or four siblings, and then one or two kind of become the next generation of experiencers, and one or two others like don't really have that. So there are even questions there about like, okay, if these are full-blooded, these people have the same parents on both sides,
Yep.
like why are a couple of these inheriting these traits or continuing in that tradition, if you will, and these others aren't, right? It's fascinating stuff, and it deserves a lot more research. And at the same time, we're in a situation with regard to this field where for a long time now, the only people that have been really seriously looking at the biometrics of family lineages are people that are in, you know, that are heavily involved in the intelligence community, you
Sure.
know. Again, I picked up this book earlier, Forbidden Science, Volume 6. There are so many stories about like Kit Green in here,
Yeah.
other people along those lines. And, if anybody is even casually aware of the last 20 years of ufology research and stuff, they really should pick up that book and read it, because like some of the timelines, you'll find that the dates are a little jarring sometimes about like who was there when, and it deserves exploration, because some of these cases, you know experiencers need to be understood, and like there deserves to be a lot more exploration to that degree. And then there'll be troubling cases like what I've seen in here, where like in 2014 there's a meeting that was described where Kit Green was taking like was describing doing a briefing of taking blood and biometrics from certain experiencer cases to DARPA. And I know some people that were in that study group, by the way,
Wow.
and they were not very happy when they
Yeah.
found out that their blood and other information went to DARPA of all places.
I've heard
Like,
that as well. Chris Bartell, he complained. He basically, Gary Nolan made, it was one of the interviews, Gary Nolan, I can't remember on which channel, maybe Tucker Carlson even. And basically he flashed up on the screen talking about Havana syndrome was the MRI, and the number of the MRI matched Chris Bartell. He's like, that's my number, that was up on the screen. And Kit Green, I don't think told him he was going to give that data to anyone else. I think he just said, give me your medical records. So it seemed, that's not the first time I've heard that.
yeah, and I've heard that from other experiencers that specifically were in study groups like that with that particular individual and other individuals related to that. And by the way, that scan also said it had Department of Energy branding on it as well,
Yeah.
as I recall
Okay.
from Tucker. And then afterwards, Gary was like, "Ugh, that wasn't supposed to be there," and
Wow.
he kind of regretted that.
Department of
But
Energy. Yeah. Havana syndrome with and then Chris was, they didn't tell him anything. And so now imagine seeing your medical records or your MRI up on the screen and they're talking about these really terrible effects, without telling you anything. It's like, is my brain messed up? Like, am I damaged or
and
something? What did they find? They're not going to tell me. Yeah, so really
and
strange.
I
It always appears to be like the same people too that just like keep showing up, like Travis Taylor will randomly, he's been on Skinwalker Ranch and then we find out he was in the UAP task force and then you see his name on older, investigations and documents as well. It's like the same people keep showing up in these investigations, and they all have top secret clearances. They're all, like you said, at least somehow related to the security apparatus. Are they trustable? Is it just they always end up in those positions because they're so interested and they're the only ones that will do it, or they're the experts, so people call them. There's nobody else that looks into this stuff. I don't know.
I mean, and it's also difficult. There's a lot of overlap here. I'm reminded about when, Lou Elizondo was, that those famous words about it being somber when some of this stuff gets out. And yeah, I mean, I think that one of the challenges here is that there have been cases. I'm not, and I don't want to speak in contemporary framework. It's partially to keep myself out of a little bit of hot water, but like, you know, experiencers and others have been treated like lab rats over the years. Let's look at a situation like, I'm not saying anything about TT, Dr. Taylor, or Jay Stratton necessarily, but after the UAP task force, where did they go? They went to a defense contractor that's heavily associated with directed energy weapons. So that's interesting. Huh. Why would that be? Why would other people, associated with that have, that core group? Some of them are very, very tied to directed energy and, reverse engineering field effects. Like, for example, in those old OSAP dirts, there's a lot of interesting information in that. Like, and again, I'm not painting these people as, these people are doing their jobs. They have very interesting careers. They have very interesting jobs. They're looking at, like us, some of the coolest stuff imaginable. But you know when we look at OSAP, we don't often think about what's right in the middle there. Weapon systems.
Yeah.
Weapon systems, right? And like, for some reason, we've kind of like all turned a blind eye to what that could possibly mean. And I don't think that that's necessarily the right course of action, especially if we're in a situation now where we're looking at a field where there's this weird kind of enmeshed situation where, on one hand, we're dealing with ufology in a conventional sense. And then we've also seen this kind of parallel track of things like remote viewing, remote influencing, and even human experimentation on the mind and field effects thereof. There's a lot there. Non-lethal weaponry, directed energy, and people are increasingly bringing up this topic, and it's for good reason, because I think that people are going to have to be acclimated to the reality that people have been hiding inconvenient realities under the auspices of ufology for decades and assuming or hoping that this stuff wasn't going to come to light, right? And it's not my job for it to come out. Like, I like my health. I like my life. I'm making a social sciences television docuseries that's about frameworks for people understanding this topic in a responsible way. However, there's a reason why a lot of people that look at this topic more seriously, after a while, adults that have bright minds with nuance, eventually start to back away, or start to ask deeper questions about what some of the stuff is actually covering for.
Well, and what is your experience dealing with the experiencers? Because I'm sure you know about Jake Barber and his psionics assets claim that they basically, the military or defense contractors are using these psionic assets, effectively experiencers, I would guess, or people that can at least interact with the phenomenon, which in my mind is an experiencer. What's your take on the psionics and them using this to possibly attract craft?
Oh, that's a good question. Thanks for that. I think that I wouldn't want to. I knew some of the basic parameters of that case well over a year ago through some of the people kind of attached to it. But what I heard at the beginning through what I saw last month there are some key differences. And those key differences, some of them I don't feel comfortable talking about because I haven't cleared with the people that are directly involved with that to really try to tease out, like, why am I seeing a discrepancy here versus what I heard at the beginning. But I will say a couple things. I was impressed with Jake Barber's original testimony. The News Nation report seemed a little bit all over the place. They were trying to fit a lot of information into a very short amount of time. I saw the second, more thorough interview with Ross. It's the longer form version. I was pretty impressed by that. Then I saw Jesse Michaels, and I started having some questions around the general parameters of some of that stuff. And I think that some of it just deserves being asked. And I think that that we need to have some adult conversations about this. Like, why is a stealth helicopter pilot, somebody that's tasked with doing this, also tasked with being embedded in Stephen Greer's retreats to go finger whistleblowers to be reported to the FBI?
Yeah.
Like, those seem like two different skill sets. Human, you know, counterintelligence operations and stealth helicopter operator. Usually those seem like they would be, two different classifications. Other people that are more high level military or in defense contractor positions would know better than I if somebody is kind of like sent in to do that kind of James Bond field work on the ground, embedding themselves in the UFO community, as well as, picking up, hardware while in a helicopter and flying it to a secure location. I think that deserves being looked at, and why that would be the case. And, along those lines, the guy seems very sympathetic. It seems like he's had a change of heart recently after being involved in this very secretive program. Um, and at the same time, I think it seems like a lot of the community around this field is a little bit skeptical of some of this stuff because of the ties to venture capitalism, right? And the ties to, and like we talked about before, there's an issue where it's like people do need to make a living wage off of studying this stuff. And at the same time, there's also a position where it's like, when somebody talks about having a change of heart about what they were doing before, but it seems to involve a lot of money, like that deserves, some honest questions and answers as well. So, I think that particular story is complicated. It's complicated also by, some of the surrounding figures around it. I think we're just going to have to wait for some of the data, from Jake Barber and that team to see what's really going on there. I'm curious because on the one hand, with disclosure and transparency issues over the last 15 years, if you don't mind me teasing this out for just a second here.
No, please.
We've had a situation where there have been people from the DoD essentially that have been openly associated with the DoD, like Sue or Sean Kirkpatrick, for example, from Arrow and others, that are kind of allowed to be seen and are kind of pushed out in front of us as these kind of mustache twirling villains that say, like, that put out these like terrible reports and debunk things left and right and will roll their eyes and give an interview where they sound like this, and they're just like, wow, what is this? And then they'll go back to their cushy job at Oak Ridge, National Labs or wherever, where, by the way, there's been longstanding rumors of reverse engineered technology being hidden. So, you've got that. And then on the other side, you have a bunch of folks that are positioned and called whistleblowers, but still hold defense contracts. And, either through Space Force or, through SAIC, for example, or through other situations, as either independent contractors or, through these major defense contractors. And they kind of act as if they're whistleblowers, but in fact, it seems like what they're actually doing is more kind of like a public facing positive spin on what's happening. It reminds me again of Forbidden Science 6, which I can't recommend highly enough.
Yeah.
There's a conversation that where Jacques Vallée is talking about having a dinner conversation with Tom DeLonge. And Tom DeLonge is kind of, again, this is covering the years 2010 to 2019. So this will be of a lot of interest to those of us that came into the field around the time of TTSA, the original December 2017 article by Leslie and Ralph and Helene Cooper, et cetera, et cetera. What led up to that? What happened after that? And Tom's talking in a dinner meeting with Jacques, and Jacques reporting it at the time, about how, George Knapp helped give him the idea originally of like, well, what if we let the Pentagon talk about their side of the story? Like, wouldn't that be cool? Like, maybe they should be allowed to talk about their side of the story. And Jacques just reporting it as a dinner meeting in his journals. And, as my friend Kelly Chase likes to say, the best place to hide information from the ufology community is in a book, because most of them don't read.
Most of them don't read. Do they watch videos or docuseries?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's kind of why you and I have to exist in the space that we do, right? But so you look at a situation like that, and so we've had this element where there's Sean Kirkpatrick and folks like that were trained to be like, I hate them, they're terrible, this kind of like new Project Blue Book. And there's good reason to be frustrated at stuff like that. It's like patently false. We know that it's patently false, and it's even positioned as kind of a heel, right? And then you've got another side where you've got these people that still hold security clearances. And how much could they be a whistleblower really if they're still funneling all their stuff through Dopser, right? How much can they really be whistleblowing? Is that really a whistleblower anymore at all? And so then you've got those two poles. And then now, and that was working for a good long time. And then you have a situation recently where people started to figure out like, these people are playing games with us. Some of these people they're managing the conversation, where if you go outside the bounds of this, if you start talking over here instead of in here, you might start to have problems if you're a prominent member of the UFO community. It might start to bite you in the ass. So then, you go over here, and then this third pole develops. We've got this new thing over here. It's in the last couple of months, and you've got, we're gonna be doing CE5s over here. We're gonna be talking, the Mars architecture that popped back up too, right? And like, oh man, mantids. We're gonna talk mantids. We're gonna be talking orbs. We're gonna be calling in craft. Like everything. You're gonna have everything, and in a way, that's a back to the '90s mentality. That's like core lore. Before this whole transparency effort of the last 20 years, before that, we would just get thrown everything from dubious folks, like lightly associated with that maybe were vets, maybe weren't. And, you may remember from the 90s or in your research since then, looking back, that was a period where the national security state anywhere around there involved with security would just throw a lot of spaghetti about at the wall. Dulce Base, Area 51, reptilians on the West Coast, like everything all the time. And I think what we might see developing right now, and what would be helpful for people to kind of be really responsible and nuanced and considering, and trying to kind of hold back from letting themselves get completely subsumed in this, is the idea that there might be three poles now, where before we had the debunking pole from the DoD and others, and then you had this kind of like responsible controlled disclosure line from people that are strongly associated with defense contractors. And then now you've got this kind of newfound, like new money, venture capitalism area, where you're getting a lot of spaghetti thrown at the wall. And people are starting to get confused, like, well, okay, how do those orbs relate with the grays? And how do the grays relate with pulling down a craft from the sky when you pray and then use EM drives or whatever, right? And I think that what we might see developing here is a situation where folks want you to pray or hope, you know, at the end of the day that you're going to pray for controlled disclosure. You're going to hope, you're going to touch wood, you're going to do whatever that between this debunking space and this wild ass space over here that's developing on the other side, that you're going to come towards the middle and you're going to accept whatever narrative that they're going to put in front of you. And, you know, that's their job. You know, the national security state is not based towards transparency. It's based towards risk mitigation. And, you know, risk mitigation and transparency often are at odds with each other. So on the one hand, we can't blame these people. They're just doing the job that they've been given, you know, but national security and transparency efforts are miles apart from each other. And, you know, I think that it's important for us as a community in general to have more adult conversations about that, have more nuanced conversations about that, where people aren't necessarily bad people. They're not necessarily, you know, doing this or that or the other thing, but that they might be, you know, that managing a narrative over a 20 to 30 year cycle, and that it not even actually being the most accurate narrative sometimes, you know, that might be what they have to do sometimes. And that they might have our best interests at heart. You know, it might be about national security. It might be about protection. It might be about making sure that China, because we can't hold a town hall, have 286 million Americans in a room and tell us a bunch of secrets and not have Russia or China or anybody else find out about it. It's just the way that it goes. So what do we do after that? And how do we deal with that in a way that promotes empathy and promotes actual transparency? I think these are important concepts.
So what do you think is the best way forward to actually get responsible UAP disclosure? Because it seems like if anything, they could at least admit we're not alone, that there are other entities out there.
Absolutely. Completely agreed. Completely agreed. And that seems like a very basic situation, you know? I mean, in Carl Nell's kind of infamous / amazing presentation at Soul One, he showed this slide, you know, I was there in the room, and, you know, somebody who I won't name, Deep Prasad, you know, took a picture of it and posted it immediately, and it became, you know, people were like, oh, who did that? We got to find him, to have him take it down, you know. And eventually the lecture came out, and in Nell's presentation, he made a very clear case for why controlled disclosure needs to happen the way that it does, to risk, you know, to do mitigation, risk mitigation, etc., to gently acclimate people to the narrative, and to avoid catastrophic disclosure. And people really capitalized on the catastrophic disclosure definition, and that really took to the public consciousness. But people weren't really looking at the headline there, which is that he clearly showed us like a 20-year timeline. And on it, at that point, it said that in October 2030 was when we would actually, the ball, you know, the penny would drop about non-human intelligence, you know, on a more global scale being acknowledged. And, you know, does that calendar hold true? You know, is it even accurate as of now, you know, a year and a half later? I'm not entirely sure. I think that what people like Carl are trying to do is ostensibly a good thing. I think that trying to do this in a methodical, thoughtful way makes a lot of sense. And for people that have been privy to certain information like him, and are, you know, people that, you know, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt, and are trying to do an ethical job, you know, are trying to do the best they can within that realm. I can understand that. And I can also understand why there does need to be, you know, private companies, private individuals, academic groups, hobbyists, enthusiasts, people using prosumer gear out in the field, doing the very best that they can on independent levels as well. Um, I think that all of that is important for transparency. And that if we're looking for a truer sense of transparency, that we're going to have to develop more tools and more enthusiasm for grassroots efforts, like what people are doing in independent media, like yourself, or what people are doing through UAP caucus, like Lester Nare's initiative, and things like that, or sensing apparatuses, smaller companies that can do that in a more open way, that aren't necessarily tied directly to some of this national security apparatus. That'd be great too. I think that that's going to be problematic in its own way if we're talking about independent people trying to figure out domain awareness, above certain areas. That's not my thing. I'm more on the ground with experiencers themselves. But I think all of that's important, as well as hearing from the experiencers themselves and really getting a better handle of that data without letting it always fall into the hands of people that seem to be using it for their own narratives. So, there's multiple tracks. I was at the Grush hearing. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was a historic day. I thought it was incredible. And like, I'll continue to support efforts like that. But I think that we're going to need like an all hands on deck approach from people from many, many different backgrounds, that are inside Washington and well outside Washington as well.
I just interviewed Jim Segala, Dr. Jim Segala. Have you seen his MooPass sensors? He basically has these sensors, and he got funding. A sponsor wanted to pay for 10,000 of these devices. That would be $4.2 million. And he said, "Wait, that's way too many. I can't even handle that many." But right now he's doing a study with 500 experiencers, I guess, where they have these devices in their house that have 15 different sensors, and then people basically write into an app. I just had a crazy experience, and then they can go back and try and correlate. Do you think that's a good way to get experiencer data? What do you think the best way to get experiencer data is?
It's a really, really great question. If that were divorced from, if a sensor program like that could happen without it necessarily being tied to the surveillance state, then I think that it could be worthwhile. I do understand why aspects of what we could call the surveillance state, there are certain people that kind of traffic near the UFO community who we know of. We know their names, that have been, part of the paradigm shift into facial recognition technology, reading license plates everywhere, scraping data off of all of our phones. The kinds of people that, if I were to sit here and be like, gosh, I love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and gosh, do I love like child-sized tents. Child-sized tents are my favorite kinds of tents that, you'd open up Instagram and see certain ads like by the end of the day, right?
The same software. Yeah, Jim said they use the same type of software.
Totally, totally. So, that does exist. And I find that troublesome. I wish that we lived, I long for the days back, but when we could just leave our house, and if somebody was trying to get in touch with us, we found out about it from the answering machine when we got back home. And if somebody was really trying to find us, maybe they couldn't. And you know what? That was okay too.
Yeah.
That was just fine.
Yeah.
We live
Maybe
in a
they
different
couldn't.
space right now. Yeah, we live in a different space right now. And depending on who has, their hands on the levers, some people feel like they can trust that or not trust that. And that sometimes seems like an arbitrary and, juvenile, position to take, right? Where like, if the monkeys can control the zoo like that, I don't know about that. So with that kind of sensor data, it's very interesting, but it really depends on the people that not just monitor that data, but where that data eventually goes and how it could be weaponized. One thing that I noticed, I was watching some of that video that you posted with Segala, interesting guy, and he's saying like, oh, we were correlating these EM readings, that were circled with these reports that these experiencers were giving later, and they were like, oh, I felt like I was being watched, I was feeling this, that, and the other thing, and they'd see an EM spike. Well, what if total, theoretical, what if somebody were to be experimenting with directed energy or EM devices that were partially about mental manipulation? What if they were doing it at a distance? What if they were able to scale up in such a way that they could cover 300, 400, even 500 people? Even 500 people. They were able to scale up to that kind of an operation at least every once in a while. At least every once in a while. And then on those certain days, they could sit there and they could go like, oh, they felt it. And then they got a self-report from that person saying, whether they got a headache, whether they felt nauseous, you know what I mean? Whether they got a migraine for 3 days, whatever it was. If that person became a willing accomplice and self-reported about the field effects of that particular EM weaponry, that would be a challenge. I don't think that Segal is doing that himself. I don't think that that's necessarily what's going on with a project like that. But I'm saying that the way that people have been used as lab rats in the past, you have to be careful in a situation like that now and in the future so that people don't get subjected in a willing way like that. Because once you sign off on something like that, it becomes very hard to claw back the results, and it becomes even very hard to claw back your own life. I've seen that.
So that's been your experience dealing with the experiencers. You said their data, just like Chris Bartel when his MRI ends up on the screen of national TV, essentially. So what you mean?
That's right.
You could have inadvertent effects. It's not, you could have like the scientists who just care about the science, but then where is that data actually going? Where is it being fully used? Could it be, like you said, weaponized?
Yeah. And it's troubling because, again, with experiencers, there's a lot of plausible deniability because we still live in a world where, at least for this brief period of time, hopefully, knock on wood, a lot of people take experiencer claims less seriously. They won't listen to them. And so it's kind of a perfect group of people to manipulate in a situation like that. If there's a situation where it's fundamentally necessary for national security or for experimentation purposes. And there are people, even prominent people, that are historically associated with the UFO community and the human potential uh arena, um that were kind of tied to historical programs in the 70s, the 80s, that thought that non-lethal weaponry was a more humane way to go about doing things, that psychological operations are a humane way to go about doing things because you don't have to get on the battlefield, you don't have to kill anybody, with situations like that. And you could make a case, or those people certainly could, that, if it comes down to it, better to just kind of like stun somebody in the head, zap them real quick, or, pull off a wild psyop than have to go into the battlefield. And again, I understand that. And if that's their imperative, if that's, what they're paid to do, and if it mitigates risk and, people don't die, I can understand the argument there, but it doesn't make it right to experiment on, willing accomplices that are doing it under the aegis of paranormal research, right? Again, not saying that happens in all cases, but I've known that it has happened in certain cases in the past. And that's troubling. It's troubling, and more people should be aware of that over the course of time. And
Do you think it
again,
should we should at least talk about it, be aware of it, but still we need all hands on deck. Basically, we still need these studies, right? Or it'll never move forward.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that people should just be aware that, at the end of the day, if they participate in studies like this, not necessarily Sagalis, I'm just saying in general, if they participate in studies like this, if they are anomalous experiencers, if they're paranormal experiencers, UAP and HI experiencers, that data they have to assume, because we live in an age where privacy increasingly doesn't exist, and that one of the only places that you still have privacy is within your own thoughts, your own reflections, your own reportage. And so if you have to be careful in situations like that, where if you're giving somebody willingly, if you're telling them what your perception was in a given situation, sometimes that's the only privacy that you have left. And to really consider whether you want to do that or not. As much as I advocate for understanding of experiencers, I also believe in the personal health and safety and privacy of the experiencers themselves. I think that is most important. And then from my personal perspective, and I know others could feel differently, but after that, I think that more cultural understanding of these experiences is absolutely, imperative.
Okay, so I guess looking ahead, what breakthroughs do you think are coming in UAP research or disclosure? What is your feeling in general that we're going to find out? What do you can I get you to speculate on what you think the actual phenomenon is?
Oh, sure. Okay. Let's see. What the phenomenon actually is. Okay. One thing that I think is crucial and what we may find out, and there's does seem to be a forcing effect, right? Where it's like, why are people like Nell and others? There seems to be, there's this accelerated timeline now that didn't exist before in terms of transparency efforts. And there seems to be an urgency around it sometimes. And that seems to be a forcing effect. Like there's something that people are either predicting or aware of or something, and people have all sorts of ideas about what they might be, rumors about this, that, or the other thing that some prophecy might have in the future, down to something that is maybe probable just because of machine learning and AI and looking at data sets. That could be a little bit more of a responsible outlook towards something like that. And, if that's the case, what could we find? I think one thing that we could find, James Madden, who's in our show Cosmosis, UFOs in a New Reality, he has this great book called The Unidentified Flying Hyperobject that came out about a year and a half ago. And it has a great theory in it called the Uber Umwelt theory. And that essentially goes into great depth about how we may have been evolved, or we may have evolved in such a way that we are not directly able to perceive objects, organisms, and other phenomena that could be directly adjacent to us, but outside our field of perception. And I think that in the near future, there's a strong likelihood that we will be making advances that could help our domain awareness in a way that is less shackled by the stereotypes that we humans have created for ourselves in terms of sensory perception. Okay. So, for example, what if you were to train an AI to look for weaknesses in our sensory perception and specifically look towards those areas? What would they find? Have AI already been tasked with doing that? What have they found? That document that Schellenberger and Corbell and others were talking about at the hearing last November, etc., talked about a domain awareness program that some might associate with sentient, a program of domain awareness, and some people might associate it with Aegis, which I talked about a little bit earlier,
The
or other
Immaculate
programs.
Constellation.
Yes. And and there might be, some AI training that's already being done and AI filtering that's already being done towards those programs, right? And what other ranges, like what are we not looking at for ourselves? So I think that there's going to be, I think that if I were to venture a guess, that there will be enormous breakthroughs within the next 5 years with regard to domain awareness that allow even possibly, prosumer or consumer grade electronics to be able to sense things that we haven't been able to sense before, partially just through the general march of technology. And that some of this will become more of a personal endeavor, and that people on the ground will be able to sense either artificially through technology or through developing their own senses that there are you know other phenomena adjacent to us more often than we might think. I think that is kind of the that's one of the smallest and but also one of the most profound aspects of what I imagined for kind of like the next 5 years in terms of human progress and the phenomenon.
So that's one of the smallest. It sounds like would find some new domain is in the consciousness domain. That's where everyone seems to be leaning, right? When you talk about the psionic assets, or if we look at breakthroughs in physics, I've been looking at that. If we look at telepathy or, life after death kind of arguments, it's like, could everything be in sort of a consciousness realm, or could consciousness be the base of reality, actually, instead of it being a emergent phenomenon of a materialistic world? Could consciousness be the base? And you make an interesting point I hadn't heard before is, will technology, new technology, find or be able to see into this domain, which seems like it would, right? If it exists, we've always been able to see into new domains. You look at infrared night vision devices, they're basically able to see into the heat realm, looking into a different spectrum of reality. So what about when you make a forward-looking consciousness pod, that could actually like detect conscious entities or something like that, some new technology? Would it be weaponized from this sort of technology that we're talking about, the consciousness technology or experiencer technology? Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's quite interesting.
Absolutely. And I mean, we have these stories from people like Pat Price back in the day of being able to remote view secure locations and even being able to read verbatim documents, from like that are halfway across the world. And, you know, and reports that are a little bit more hard to come by about remote influencing and other effects like that. The consciousness field seems like it's already a battleground, that there's already a a very quiet war for the consciousness field as a battleground. And it's been going on for at least 50 years with the advent of, the USSR's, psychokinetic programs, the remote viewing program, et cetera, et cetera. You could make a case for Ultra, other situations like that as well. Artichoke, all sorts of like older programs along those lines. And I don't think that that's abated. I don't think that that's abated at all. And at the same time, I think that maybe some of the other situations that we'll find ourselves in is that maybe there's a consciousness field, maybe that, or it certainly seems like there is from all these reports. There's this, we exist in a field, and maybe there are even other, fields that are directly adjacent to us that are kind of closer to other, realms of IR or other, that when people like Donald Hoffman, for example, he's very interested in perception, scientist out in California, and he has this great line about how biased we are as humans towards medium-sized objects, right? We are completely biased towards medium-sized objects. If anything's too big or too small, we just kind of ignore it. We'd like things to be about as big as we are, or maybe, a couple hundred times the size that we are, or maybe, as small as this little die on my desk, but if it's smaller than that or bigger than that, we tend to ignore it.
It's in a
But,
different dimension.
if,
Yeah.
yeah, but what if things are vibrating at a slightly different rate, and this stuff, I think that, when people like Diana Pasulka talk in American Cosmic about how one of her, pseudonymed sources in American Cosmic talk about how some of the next breakthroughs in my field, meaning space and aeronautics and aviation, etc., the source, are going to come from your field, meaning, Diana's history and religious studies, etc. I think that might be part of what they're talking about there. That there could be different fields right around us, not just the consciousness field, but other fields that maybe non-human intelligence and maybe us ourselves could be trying to exploit for the purposes of privacy, for the purposes of transportation, for the purposes of observation, maybe because it's their native realm. Maybe it's because of some of these other beings, or other intelligences native realm. I think that there's going to be a lot more mapping of that space, um, or I anticipate that happening because of the march of technology and the promise that we see ahead of us, where if we don't exterminate ourselves in the very near future, that kind of exploration becomes much, much more possible.
Okay, well, thank you, J. Christopher King, for being on the show. Everyone, please hit the like button if you did like these new concepts. I hadn't heard a lot of your arguments, so I thought it was a fresh perspective. And please subscribe to get future videos like this. Go check out Cosmosis. Where is it?
You can go to watchcosmosis.com and you'll find all of the outlets, all the streamers where it's available. Watchcosmosis.com.
Excellent. So go to watchcosmosis.com. Trailer looks awesome. And season 2 will be coming out as well. And so thanks for your time, Jay. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, audience, for watching. Go check out Jay's stuff. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.